Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we are unpacking a deeply challenging psychological text,
Yes, very challenging.
and it makes a bold and frankly quite uncomfortable claim about human behavior.
Uncomfortable is definitely the right word for it.
Right. It claims that our romantic choices are almost entirely out of our conscious control.
Which is a tough pill to swallow for a lot of people.
Yeah, completely. Whether you agree with the premise right out of the gate or not, the mechanics it outlines are just fascinating. So we're going to break them down for you today.
And it really addresses a universal frustration, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. If you are listening to this right now, I want you to consider this frustration. It's something you have likely experienced yourself, or at the very least, you've sat across a table holding a cup of coffee while a close friend vents about experiencing it for the fourth or fifth time in a row.
A classic pattern.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Why do people consistently seem to choose the exact wrong partners?
Right.
Why do we swear up and down with complete sincerity that we want one thing, peace, stability, kindness, open communication,
All the healthy stuff.
all the healthy stuff. But then we repeatedly find ourselves entrenched in relationships that bring us the exact same type of pain, just wearing a different face.
It really is the ultimate human paradox. I mean, we are highly intelligent creatures.
Mostly.
Right, mostly. We are capable of immense rational thought, complex problem-solving, long-term planning. Yet, when it comes to romance and interpersonal attraction, we seem to just relinquish the steering wheel entirely.
We just hand it over.
We do.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the core thesis of the material we are examining today. It proposes a very confronting idea to answer that exact frustration you just mentioned.
Let's hear it.
The argument here is that you aren't actually choosing your partners.
Okay, wait.
So I know it sounds crazy,
Yeah.
but your conscious mind, the part of you that sits down and writes out a list of healthy traits, the part that logically knows what is good and bad for you, is not making the final call.
So who is? Or what is?
Your unconscious mind is running the show entirely. And the truly paradigm-shifting part of this theory is that your unconscious mind is not looking for happiness.
It's not.
No. It has no interest in a fairy tale or a peaceful life. It is strictly looking for familiarity.
I want to stop right there, because that statement alone is going to make a lot of people instantly defensive.
Oh, of course.
I know it made me pause when I first read it. We are conditioned to believe that we are the masters of our own destiny, right?
Yeah, that we have free will.
Exactly, that we are in control of our choices, especially when it comes to who we let into our homes, our lives, our beds. To say that an invisible, unconscious force is not only making the decisions, but actively seeking out something other than our happiness, that's rough.
It implies a lack of agency that makes people very uncomfortable.
Yeah, it implies that when I'm swiping on a dating app or deciding to go on a second date with someone I met at a dinner party, my conscious criteria, wanting someone kind, funny, emotionally available.
Financially stable.
Right, financially stable.
Yeah.
All of that is essentially irrelevant.
The material suggests it is basically just surface-level noise, yes.
Surface level noise.
Think of it as PR for the ego. Your conscious mind is setting these lovely, entirely rational goals, but there's a massive tug-of-war happening completely beneath your conscious awareness.
How does the text visualize this? Because I need a picture of what's happening.
Well, to really visualize the mechanics of this, you have to think of the classic iceberg analogy, but apply it strictly to emotional survival.
Okay, the tip of the iceberg versus what's underwater.
Exactly. The conscious mind, with all its healthy, modern desires for a communicative, loving, equitable partner, that's just the tiny tip of the ice visible above the waterline.
And the rest.
The massive submerged block of ice underneath is the unconscious. And that submerged block is entirely driven by what it already knows.
What's familiar with?
Yes, the unconscious mind equates the concept of familiar with safe.
Even if that familiarity is terrible.
That's the key. Even if that familiarity is actually rooted in deep emotional pain, chaos, or trauma, to the unconscious, known pain is safer than unknown peace.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, my brain is looking at a chaotic situation, maybe a partner who is completely inconsistent, and it's thinking, I know exactly how to survive this, therefore this is a safe place to be.
That is the exact mechanism.
Whereas a truly peaceful, healthy relationship might represent the unknown.
And to the unconscious mind, the unknown is dangerous. It's an unmapped territory. If a person hasn't done deep, deliberate, introspective work to map out that submerged part of the iceberg, the unconscious mind will win that tug of war every single time.
It just overpowers the logical brain.
It has to, from an evolutionary standpoint, because it believes it is keeping you alive by steering you toward familiar territory. You will set out consciously looking for peace, and you will unconsciously lock onto chaos because chaos is the environment you have adapted to navigate.
Okay, so if we're operating on this hidden background check, where exactly is the criteria for that background check coming from?
The material points very specifically to our foundational years.
The childhood blueprint.
Yes, highlighting the ages of 0 to 7.
And I have to admit, reading the breakdown of this time frame brought on a little bit of healthy dread for me.
How so?
Well, the idea that our romantic fate, the blueprint for who we are going to love in our 30s or 40s, is largely sealed before we even learn how to tie our shoes or do basic math. That feels incredibly heavy.
It is heavy, but it is psychologically vital to grasp. Those 0 to 7 years are a unique period in human development.
What's happening in the brain during that time?
During this time, the brain is operating primarily in a theta wave state.
Wait, hold on. Theta wave state. For those of us listening who aren't neuroscientists, what does that actually mean in practice?
Sure.
Is a toddler essentially walking around in a state of mild hypnosis?
That is actually a very accurate way to describe it.
Really?
Yes. In a theta state, the brain is highly receptive and lacks the analytical filters we develop later in life. A young child is essentially a sponge absorbing raw data.
So whatever they see goes straight in, no filter.
Zero filter. They do not possess the critical thinking skills required to step back and analyze their environment objectively. Look, a 4-year-old cannot look at their parents' marriage and say, well, they have poor conflict resolution skills due to their own unresolved traumas.
Right, they can't rationalize it like an adult therapist.
Exactly. The child simply absorbs the environment as the absolute, unquestionable truth of how the world operates. This is the period where our emotional baseline is permanently set.
So we are recording data.
We are recording data on what love looks like, what it feels like, and what behaviors are required to secure it, based entirely on the specific dynamics of our childhood home.
We are quite literally downloading our core definition of love before we even possess the vocabulary to articulate the word itself.
Beautifully put, yes.
If love in your household meant constant anxiety, unpredictability, or feeling like you have to perform perfectly to earn a scrap of attention, your unconscious mind writes a foundational line of code that simply states, love equals anxiety.
Precisely. And this leads to a significant danger that the text warns about, falling into the trap of believing in destiny.
Oh, the idea that the universe is out to get you.
Right. When people don't understand that they have this highly specific, unconsciously coded programming running in the background of their lives, they end up feeling like they are cursed.
I've heard so many friends say this.
They look back at a 10-year string of failed, painful, chaotic relationships, and they throw their hands up. They ask, why me? Why is the universe constantly putting these toxic people in my path? Why is this my fate?
It is such a common sentiment. You hear people say they just have terrible luck in love, or that they are a magnet for narcissists, as if some external cosmic force is dealing them a bad hand.
But the material is essentially urging us to realize that this isn't destiny at all.
It isn't a curse.
No, and the universe isn't singling anyone out for punishment. It is just unexamined programming.
Like a computer algorithm.
Exactly like a computer algorithm. An algorithm doesn't have a vendetta against you. It is just executing the code it was given. If you never look at the code, it will just keep producing the exact same output day after day, relationship after relationship.
But the good news is, you can look at the code.
Yes. The moment you pull back the curtain and realize, wait, I'm not cursed by the universe. I'm just operating on outdated emotional software installed when I was 5 years old. You instantly reclaim your agency.
You move from being a victim of fate to being someone who simply needs a software update.
Exactly.
Let's dig into the specific dynamics of that outdated software. Because the material outlines what it calls the childhood blueprint, and it introduces this incredibly poignant, slightly devastating concept called loving from a distance.
Yes, this is a crucial part of the text.
Now, to set the stage, the source details some very specific gender dynamics regarding how this blueprint is formed. It suggests that, typically, young girls will map their fundamental understanding of love onto their relationship with their fathers, or their primary father figures.
And conversely, young boys will map their understanding of love onto their mothers or primary mother figures.
Right.
The framework relies on this traditional psychological mapping, where the child learns how to relate to the opposite sex through the lens of that primary opposite sex caretaker.
Which makes sense as a foundational premise.
It does. It is important to view this impartially as the foundational premise the authors are working from to explain broader relational patterns. But the absolute crucial nuance here, which the text emphasizes heavily, is that this observation is not an invitation to put our parents on trial.
This is not about assigning blame.
No. Parents almost always pass down these dysfunctional patterns completely unconsciously.
Because they're running their own outdated software.
Exactly. They are operating on their own unexamined 0 to 7 programming, passed down from their own parents. A parent rarely wakes up and decides to instill an abandonment complex in their child. They're simply playing out the only emotional survival script they were ever handed.
It is essentially a generational relay race of trauma, and most of the runners have no idea they're even holding the baton.
That's a great way to visualize it.
But regardless of a parent's intentions, right, even if they were doing the absolute best they could with the tools they had, we still have to look at the reality of the child's experience. The material spends a lot of time on the tragedy of unmet needs.
It does. It looks at what actually happens, physically and emotionally, when a child does not get the connection they require.
It describes situations where there is a severe lack of physical touch or a profound lack of emotional attunement. You know, the kind of environment where a parent might be physically sitting in the living room, but emotionally they are a million miles away.
That specific type of discrepancy, physical presence combined with emotional absence, is deeply confusing and distressing for a developing brain.
Because the kid can see the parent but can't feel them.
Right. When a parent pulls away, when their affection is highly inconsistent, or when they're emotionally walled off despite being in the same room, the child cannot rationalize that behavior. The child internalizes it.
They think it's their fault.
They assume the distance is a reflection of their own worth. And this is exactly what leads to the concept of learning to love from a distance.
I want to spend some time here because this concept completely reframed how I view modern dating. Learning to love from a distance. What does that actually look like as it's forming in that 0 to 7 window?
Means the child learns that love is not a warm, comfortable, enveloping state of security. They learn that love is a state of perpetual longing.
Longing.
Yes. They begin to associate the feeling of love with distance, with emotional starvation, and with the high alert, anxious feeling of trying to reach someone who is constantly pulling away.
So the anxiety becomes the proof of love.
Exactly. The physical and emotional sensation of yearning becomes inextricably linked in their neural pathways to their definition of love.
So translate that into adulthood. If that child grows up and meets someone who is stable, consistent, and emotionally available, someone who actually texts back right away, who says what they mean, who doesn't play games, how does their unconscious mind react?
The unconscious mind evaluates that stable person and says, this feels wrong. It feels boring.
Boring. Because there's no chase.
Right. Because a healthy partner doesn't trigger that familiar spike of anxiety, the unconscious mind genuinely believes that love is absent. It says there is no distance to bridge here. I don't feel that familiar starvation. Therefore, this isn't love.
This perfectly explains the absolute epidemic of anxiety in modern dating. I think about how people talk about feeling sparks or chemistry.
We mislabel anxiety as chemistry all the time.
All the time. If you are listening to this, I really want you to evaluate your own dating history. Think about the relationships that felt the most intense, the ones that consumed your thoughts. Were you actually feeling love, or were you conflating love with the anxiety of chasing someone who was keeping you at arm's length?
That is the critical question.
Think about the anxiety of seeing a read receipt on a text message and waiting 3 hours for a reply. If that panic feels like a necessary component of romance to you, if someone being straightforward and available gives you the ick.
Oh, the ick is so often just the unconscious mind rejecting safety.
Yes. If it gives you the ick or feels suffocating, the material suggests your baseline blueprint associated love with starvation.
It completely redefines what we consider to be romantic chemistry. And to illustrate how this plays out in real time, the material provides a brilliant, highly detailed case study. It breaks down the anatomy of a toxic attraction through a phenomenon we can refer to as the magnet effect.
Let's walk through this case study carefully because it is painfully relatable. We start with a woman.
Okay.
According to the text, she grew up with a profound, deep-seated fear of abandonment. This stems directly from a lack of consistent emotional connection with her father during her foundational years.
So she has an abandonment wound.
Right. As a result, she learned to constantly, hypervigilantly monitor her environment to see if she was about to be left behind or forgotten.
Always on high alert.
Now we introduce a man. He carries a deeply ingrained sense of inadequacy and guilt. During his 0 to 7 years, his mother constantly compared him to others, criticized his efforts, and made him feel like he was fundamentally flawed and never quite enough.
So we have two adults walking around with very specific complementary psychological wounds. The woman's core fear is being abandoned. The man's core fear is being inadequate and blamed.
And the text argues that when these two people happen to walk into the same crowded room, the initial spark of attraction is not driven by the things we usually credit.
No, not at all.
They aren't primarily drawn together because they both like the same indie band, or because they find each other's physical features objectively attractive, or because they have great witty banter.
All of those conscious preferences are secondary.
So what's actually happening?
What is actually happening is that their unconscious minds are rapidly scanning the room, picking up on microexpressions, subtle body language, and vocal tonality, and recognizing a perfect familiar match.
It is essentially like Bluetooth pairing for trauma.
That is a very apt analogy. The woman's unconscious mind identifies the exact man in the room who possesses the emotional architecture to eventually trigger her abandonment wound.
And the man?
The man's unconscious mind hones in on the woman who has the capacity to eventually make him feel the intense inadequacy and blame he experienced in his childhood.
Meanwhile, they are just having a drink and chatting.
Right. Their conscious minds are having a lovely conversation, thinking, wow, he's so handsome and successful, or she's so charming and funny.
But beneath the surface,
Their unconscious minds are sighing in relief, saying, finally, I found a person who knows how to hurt me in the exact way I know how to survive.
that is deeply unsettling. But it leads to a huge question. If the unconscious mind is actively seeking out familiar pain, why doesn't the relationship start out painful? We all know that the beginning of these toxic relationships is usually incredible.
It's the best feeling in the world at first.
The material details this phenomenon, calling it the hormonal mask, which typically lasts for the first 6 to 8 months. During this honeymoon phase, the woman isn't feeling abandoned at all, and the man isn't feeling inadequate. They feel like they have found their soulmates. Everything is flawless. Why does the brain play this trick?
This is where evolutionary biology temporarily overrides our psychology.
How so?
In the initial stages of a new romance, the brain releases a massive, intoxicating cocktail of neurochemicals, primarily dopamine, oxytocin, and serotonin.
The love drugs.
Exactly. This chemical rush is incredibly powerful. From an evolutionary perspective, its purpose is to ensure pair bonding to propagate the species.
Just to keep us together long enough to survive.
Right. But psychologically, it acts as a highly effective emotional anesthetic. It temporarily suppresses those deep-seated unconscious fears. The sheer volume of dopamine makes the woman feel entirely secure and prioritized, and it makes the man feel completely validated and successful.
So it's a biological honeymoon phase designed to fuse the pair together before their underlying flaws can drive them apart.
It's nature's glue.
But anesthetics always wear off. You can't stay high on dopamine forever.
You really can't.
And when those chemical levels inevitably normalize, the material describes the inevitable crash. The hormones fade, the rose-colored glasses shatter, and the curtain drops. And this is where the cycle of destruction truly begins.
This is where the magnet effect goes from attraction to repulsion.
Let's script this out. Walk us through exactly how this crash happens between our case study subjects. The woman with the abandonment wound and the man with the inadequacy wound.
The crash rarely starts with a massive betrayal or a dramatic event. It almost always begins with something completely mundane. Let's say it's a Tuesday evening. The woman might voice a totally normal, everyday complaint. Perhaps he forgot to pick up the groceries he promised to get, or he left a mess in the kitchen.
Okay, totally normal. Couple stuff.
In a healthy, secure dynamic, this is just a request for a slight behavior adjustment. But because the hormonal mask is completely slipped, her complaint no longer hits his conscious, rational mind.
It bypasses the logic completely.
It bypasses it entirely and strikes a direct hit on his unhealed childhood wound. His unconscious mind doesn't hear, please help with the kitchen. It hears his mother's voice saying, you are failing, you are inadequate, you can't do anything right, you are to blame, just like always.
Wow. So he experiences a present-day logistical complaint as a severe historical attack on his worth.
Precisely. And because that specific flavor of pain is so unbearable for him, his core defense mechanism kicks in immediately. He withdraws.
He shuts down.
He might shut down emotionally, give her the silent treatment, get intensely defensive, or physically leave the house to escape the feeling of inadequacy.
Now, look at what his reaction does to the woman. His sudden emotional and physical withdrawal is the exact trigger for her deepest childhood wound. Abandonment.
Yes.
He pulls away, and her unconscious mind goes into absolute panic mode. It screams, he is leaving you, just like your father did. You're being abandoned again.
Her nervous system interprets his withdrawal not as him needing space, but as a literal threat to her emotional survival.
So naturally, she panics. To soothe her overwhelming anxiety, she pursues him.
The chase begins.
She might text him relentlessly, follow him into the other room, raise her voice, or become more demanding, desperately trying to force him back into connection to prove he isn't leaving.
Which, of course, just makes him feel more attacked, more blamed, and more inadequate.
So he withdraws even further behind his walls.
It creates a perfectly closed-loop system of mutual destruction. They begin to deeply resent and blame each other for the misery of the relationship, completely unaware that they are actually fighting ghosts from their respective childhoods.
They think they are having a screaming match about groceries.
But they're actually arguing with their parents. The relationship, which started with such an intense, intoxicating connection, degrades into a deeply isolated, incredibly lonely battleground, where two people are just constantly, endlessly triggering each other's deepest traumas.
This isn't just a matter of having a few bad arguments. The material does not shy away from the long-term compounding consequences of this cycle, which brings us to the harsh realities of familiar pain.
The stakes are incredibly high here.
Because the stakes escalate far beyond bickering. When you are trapped in this loop, it bleeds into every aspect of your life.
The escalation is dramatic and often devastating. The source is unequivocally clear. When the unconscious mind is driving the bus, it has zero regard for your overall well-being, your finances, or your physical health.
It doesn't care if you're happy or healthy.
It only cares about recreating the familiar pattern. People operating blindly from these unhealed blueprints often find themselves in situations involving profound devastation. We are talking about severe financial losses, where they unconsciously sabotage their own stability or tie themselves legally and financially to someone who drains their resources.
Because that chaos feels like home.
Right. And the chronic stress of these toxic dynamics leads to severe emotional burnout and tangible physical distress. Ultimately, it results in a complete draining of a person's capacity for trust and compassion, leaving them entirely depleted and cynical.
And to highlight just how extreme this unconscious drive can be, the material brings up a very specific and honestly a highly controversial example.
The betrayal aspect.
Let's look at what it says about the concept of betrayal and infidelity. I have to push back a little here because, on the surface, this sounds absurd. No one wants to be betrayed. Infidelity is consistently ranked as one of the most agonizing, traumatic experiences a human being can endure. How can the text possibly justify the idea that we would actively, even unconsciously, seek out our own devastation?
It is a shocking claim, but we have to view it strictly through the lens of the unconscious mind seeking familiarity above all else, even above self-preservation.
Okay, unpack that for us.
The text asserts that if a person grew up in an environment where deep betrayal was a familiar, normalized dynamic, perhaps they witnessed serial infidelity between their parents, or profound, foundation-shattering betrayals among their close caretakers, that specific flavor of pain becomes a known, mapped entity to their developing unconscious mind.
So the unconscious mind essentially categorizes betrayal not as an anomaly to be avoided, but as a standard, expected component of love and family life.
Yes, and because it is the mapped reality, the unconscious mind might actually orchestrate, provoke, or deliberately seek out situations where the person is ultimately betrayed in their adult relationship.
Orchestrate their own betrayal.
This is the critical distinction. They do not do this because they enjoy suffering. It's not a form of conscious masochism.
Then why do it?
They do it because the unconscious mind fiercely craves the emotional familiarity of that specific pain. Psychologically, it is often an attempt at mastery.
An attempt at mastery.
The unconscious creates the familiar trauma, hoping that this time the adult self can control the outcome and fix a betrayal in a way the child self could not.
Wow.
But inevitably, the outcome is just more pain.
Give me a second to fully process that. The idea that we might subconsciously curate our own heartbreak, that we might ignore massive red flags or actively sabotage a good dynamic just to engineer a betrayal because the devastation feels like home, that is terrifying.
It is a very dark realization for a lot of people.
And it perfectly explains the compounding effect of bitterness that the text describes. When we go through this cycle, when we get our hearts broken again and again, we don't usually sit down and say, oh, my 0 to 7 blueprint is acting up, I should look inward.
No, we look outward. We blame the ex. We blame dating apps. We blame an entire gender.
Exactly. We add thick new layers of prejudice and bitterness to our worldview. We walk away from a devastating breakup, we lick our wounds, and we tell ourselves a protective story. All men are untrustworthy liars, or all women are demanding and manipulative.
We genuinely think we are learning, adapting, and getting wiser.
We proudly declare that we are becoming pickier. We construct massive, complex, defensive walls, completely convinced that we are protecting ourselves from future harm.
But the tragedy outlined in the material is that those walls are entirely useless, aren't they?
They are worse than useless. They are an illusion.
Why do they fail so completely?
They fail because the conscious mind built them, but the unconscious mind is still in the driver's seat. You can build all the conscious walls you want, you can create a list of 100 red flags to avoid, but your unconscious will simply find a more sophisticated, stealthy way to navigate right back to the exact same painful destination.
The judgments, the bitterness, and the walls actually narrow your worldview.
They ensure that you remain trapped in the cycle, completely blind to the root cause, which is your own internal programming.
Hearing all of this, I can't help but feel a little panicked. If our unconscious is this powerful, if it's running on software from when we were toddlers, and if our conscious defenses are basically useless, are we just doomed?
Tell me the source material offers some sort of manual to override this system. Because if we just stop the analysis here, it's an incredibly bleak picture.
It would be bleak, but fortunately the material doesn't just diagnose this incredibly complex problem. It provides a comprehensive way out.
Oh, thank goodness.
It offers real, actionable tools to dismantle the system. This is where we transition from understanding the theory to applying the action. The text provides a roadmap for bringing the unconscious into the conscious realm.
Because once you see it, you can change it.
Once something is made conscious, it loses its invisible power over you. There are two primary reprogramming techniques detailed in the text that we need to explore. The first one is a process we can refer to as the emotional time machine.
Let's spend a lot of time on this because I want to walk through exactly what this looks and feels like for a person attempting it in real life. It is an exercise designed to be used specifically in the aftermath of a conflict.
So let's say you just had a massive, triggering argument with your partner.
Step one, according to the text, is absolutely vital, and it's heavily focused on the nervous system. You have to wait for the initial fiery anger to subside.
Yes, attempting psychological excavation while you are actively triggered is useless. You cannot do this work when your nervous system is in a full fight-or-flight response.
You're just reacting at that point.
When your heart rate is elevated and cortisol is flooding your system, your brain is focused purely on survival, not introspection. You have to wait until the screaming stops, the door slamming is over, and the adrenaline is cleared. You need to find a quiet space where you are entirely alone and physically safe.
Physiological regulation has to come first.
Okay, so you are sitting alone in a quiet room, your breathing is slowed down, and the immediate storm has passed.
Step two requires a level of brutal honesty with yourself that most people actively avoid. You must look past the subject of the argument. You have to completely forget about the unwashed dishes, or the tone of voice they use, or who is technically right about the timeline of events.
That's so hard to do when you just want to win the argument.
It is, but you have to identify the core emotional wound that was struck. How does a person actually do that?
You have to become an impartial observer of your own internal state.
Yeah.
You ask yourself, beneath the anger, beneath the desire to be right, what am I actually feeling in my body right now?
Because anger is just the surface.
Anger is almost always a secondary emotion. It is a shield. You have to lower the shield and look at the vulnerable feeling underneath. Is it, I feel completely worthless? Is it, I feel entirely inadequate and stupid? Is it, I feel unlovable and invisible? You have to isolate that specific frequency of pain.
And once you have that core emotion isolate, let's say you sit there and realize, beneath all my yelling, I just feel totally inadequate.
You move to step 3, which is a fascinating visualization technique.
The text suggests physically altering your gaze. It instructs you to stare into a blank space, like a plain white wall, or to go outside and look up at the empty sky. Why such a specific physical instruction?
Because looking into a vast, featureless space helps to temporarily suspend the analytical conscious part of your brain.
How does that work?
When you look at an object, your brain categorizes it. When you look at nothing, your brain enters a mild trance state. It induces a slight dissociation from your immediate present-day surroundings.
That makes a lot of sense.
This is a deliberate technique to bypass the conscious mind's logical defenses and open a direct pathway to the unconscious database where your childhood memories are stored.
So you were staring into the sky, bypassing the conscious mind's chatter. What is the internal monologue? What do you do next?
While consciously holding on to that specific painful feeling of inadequacy, you ask your unconscious mind a direct, pointed question. When did I first feel this exact way? Who was the very first person to make me feel this?
And then you have to be quiet.
The text promises that if you allow your mind to be still, if you don't force it, the answer will naturally surface. A memory will float up from that 0 to 7 age range.
Just spontaneously.
Yes. It might be a memory you haven't thought of in 30 years. It might be a Tuesday afternoon when you were 5, sitting at the kitchen table, feeling this exact same knot in your stomach because of something a parent said or did.
And when that memory surfaces, the goal isn't to analyze it to death, right? It's not about intellectually dissecting the memory. The text emphasizes something much more visceral.
The goal is somatic release.
Somatic release.
You allow the memory to surface, and you mentally place yourself back in that childhood moment. And then you just sit in it. You let that trapped, unexpressed childhood emotion, the tears you couldn't cry because you were told to be quiet, the anger you weren't allowed to express because it was unsafe to talk back to your parent, you let it finally, fully discharge in your adult body.
You feel it completely in the present moment. You cry the tears. You feel the rage.
That is profound. You are essentially completing an emotional circuit that was left open decades ago.
By discharging that trapped emotional energy, you drain the battery of the unconscious mind. You take away its power to unconsciously drive your current relationships.
If the inadequacy is felt and released, your unconscious no longer needs to hire a partner to trigger it.
That's the emotional time machine. But there's a second technique provided, and this one is a real mind bender. Let's call it decoding the perfect partner list.
This one is incredibly practical.
Every single one of us has a list, whether it's meticulously written down in a journal or just floating around in our heads as a set of standards. So the exercise begins simply. Write down the top 5 traits of your ultimate, absolute perfect partner.
Right. It seems like a standard journaling exercise. So the person might sit down and write, I want someone who is wealthy, intensely loyal, extremely reliable, highly communicative, and physically affectionate.
On the surface, that sounds like a great list. It sounds incredibly healthy and mature. But then the text delivers this massive perspective-shifting aha moment.
It does. It asks you to look at that list, go through it trait by trait, and ask yourself a very confronting question. Who do these traits actually represent?
It's turning the mirror back on you.
The exercise forces you to map each desired trait back to your childhood deficits. It challenges the assumption that you are looking for a partner, suggesting instead that you are trying to fill a historical void.
Let's break that down with some deep hypothetical examples, because applying this logic changes everything about how we view desire.
Take the trait reliable. If reliability is your absolute #1 must-have, if unreliability is your biggest trigger, does that trait actually represent the father you could never count on?
Wow.
Are you seeking reliability not just because it's a generally nice trait to have in a partner, but because your inner child is desperate to soothe the lingering anxiety of an unpredictable, chaotic childhood?
Or take the trait of loyalty. Does your fierce, uncompromising need for loyalty represent a grandfather who walked out or a mother who emotionally abandoned the family? Does the deep desire for someone wealthy stem from an unconscious terror of the financial panic and insecurity you felt as a child in your home? Exactly. The realization here, and it hits like a ton of bricks when you actually do the exercise, is that you aren't actually looking for a modern, equal partner to share a life with. You are essentially holding auditions.
Holding auditions.
You are sitting in a casting director's chair, trying to hire an actor to play a missing piece from your past. You want them to retroactively fix your childhood. You want them to be the parent you didn't get.
And what's fascinating and deeply tragic is how much impossible pressure that puts on a relationship.
Because no one can live up to that.
No human being, no matter how much they love you, can successfully audition to be your retroactively perfect parent. It is an impossible job description that guarantees failure. But once you decode your list, once you realize that your intense desires are actually just echoes of your childhood deprivations, you can start to separate your past from your present.
You can see them clearly.
You can look at your partner as a flawed human being rather than a stand-in for your parents. You can stop demanding that your current partner heal a wound they didn't create.
Okay, so let's say a person actually does this heavy lifting. We've identified the invisible, unconscious matchmaker. We've survived the realization of the hormonal mask slipping. We've gone back in the time machine and discharged the somatic pain. We've decoded the perfect partner list and stopped holding auditions. What does life actually look like on the other side of this work?
What is the tangible reward for facing these ghosts?
Yes. The source talks about entering an entirely new field of attraction, which sounds almost mystical, but reading further, it's very grounded in behavioral psychology.
It is deeply grounded in psychology and interpersonal neurobiology. The text uses the concept of raising your conscious level. To understand this, think of your unhealed emotional wounds as a specific radio frequency.
A radio frequency.
For years, your unconscious has been broadcasting on a frequency of anxiety, inadequacy, or abandonment. Naturally, you only tune into and attract partners who are broadcasting on a complementary toxic frequency. But when you do this inner work, when you identify the root memories and discharge those trapped emotions, you stop broadcasting that old signal.
You literally exit your old energetic and psychological field of attraction.
And because you are no longer broadcasting that signal of familiar pain, you stop noticing the people who would trigger it. And more importantly, they stop noticing you.
It's like you become invisible to the toxic dynamics that used to define your entire romantic life. A manipulator or an emotionally unavailable person will look at you, realize they can't hook into your old wounds, and they will simply move on. Instead, you start to naturally attract and be attracted to entirely different people.
Exactly. You begin to encounter people who are also operating at this elevated conscious level. You start noticing the people who are reading, reflecting, questioning their own behavioral patterns,
Right.
and doing their own internal work.
Because your unconscious is no longer screaming for a trauma bond to resolve the past, you finally have the psychological space to actually connect with someone based on true present-day compatibility, shared values, and mutual respect.
And there's a fascinating detail the text points out about these new, healthy relationships.
Yeah.
Because they aren't built on the foundation of trauma bonds, they feel very different at the beginning. And this difference can actually be confusing for people at first.
Yes, and this trips a lot of people up when they first start healing. When you meet a healthy partner after a lifetime of toxic ones, there is no frantic, explosive 6-month hormonal obsession. There aren't crazy butterflies in your stomach, which, by the way, are often just a nervous system panic response mislabeled as romance.
Right. We've completely romanticized anxiety and called it butterflies. We think if our stomach isn't in knots, it isn't true love.
Precisely. Because your unconscious mind isn't desperately latching onto a familiar trauma, the dynamic lacks that chaotic, desperate intensity.
Yeah.
Instead, the love builds slowly. It is steady, it is deeply peaceful, it is calm, not chaotic. For someone who is used to the roller coaster of toxic attraction, this calm can initially feel boring, or it can feel like a lack of chemistry.
But the text reassures the reader that this slow, steady build is the hallmark of a genuine romance that will actually endure. It is the transition from surviving a relationship to actually thriving in one.
So what does this all mean for the rest of our lives? Because as we conclude this analysis, the source makes a very clear point to say that this 0 to 7 programming isn't just confined to who we date. It spills over into absolutely everything we do.
Absolutely. The emotional baseline set in childhood dictates your relationship with love, yes, but it also dictates your relationship with success, with money, with authority, and with your own self-worth.
It's everything.
If you grew up feeling unworthy of attention, you might unconsciously sabotage your career achievements or your financial success. Because deep down, your baseline programming tells you that you don't deserve them. You might pick bosses who treat you exactly like your hypercritical parent. Cleaning up that early programming unblocks all areas of your life. It allows you to step out of the shadows of your past and reach what the text beautifully calls your highest version.
The highest version of yourself. I really love that concept. We've covered an incredible amount of ground today. We moved from the confronting realization that we are trapped by an invisible, unconscious matchmaker to understanding exactly how our 0 to 7 childhood blueprint permanently sets our emotional baseline.
We broke down the painful anatomy of toxic attraction, watching how the biological hormonal mask inevitably falls away to reveal two people fighting the ghosts of their past.
We faced the harsh realities of familiar pain, including the provocative idea that we might even unconsciously seek out betrayal. And then, crucially, we walked through the practical, demanding tools to rewire the mind, utilizing the emotional time machine for somatic release and decoding the perfect partner list to stop holding auditions for our past.
It is a profound, challenging journey. It moves a person from being a passive victim of their own unconscious mind to becoming the active architect of their own conscious life.
And I want to speak directly to you right now as you listen to this deep dive. The most important takeaway from all of this material is that you are not cursed. Your past, no matter how chaotic or painful, does not have to be your permanent blueprint. You have the power to examine the code, rewrite it, and change the entire trajectory of your life.
And if I may leave you with one final lingering thought that builds upon the foundational wisdom of the material we've explored today.
Please do.
We spend so much of our lives angry at the people who broke our hearts. We label them as the villains in our story, the people who ruined our trust. But if our unconscious mind is always constantly trying to recreate our past, just so we can finally ultimately heal it, what if the partners who hurt us the most weren't our enemies at all?
What if they were just our unconscious mind's clumsy, desperate attempt to finally set us free?
That is something to sit with and really think about.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We will be back soon to unpack more incredible ideas. Until then, keep questioning, keep reflecting, and take care of yourselves.